Hey guys, today I thought I would make a video about my carnivorous plants. I only have these three, but I am totally fascinated by them and I would love to add to my collection. These are my three, two Venus flytraps and one pitcher plant. I'll put links in the description to websites that can give you more information about these plants too. So the Venus flytraps are native to North and South Carolina in the United States. And the pitcher plants, well, pitcher plants are native to a lot of places. They belong to two genuses or genera. This one is from the genus Nepenthes, and they're called tropical pitcher plants. They're native to tropical areas in mostly the Eastern Hemisphere. But the other one is called, the other genus is called Sarracenia, and those are native to Canada and parts of North America. I would really like to get my hands on one of those guys. See how these pitchers hang down from each leaf? The leaf grows out and then grows a little stem like this and forms a tiny pitcher at the end that hangs down. But in the North American ones, they radiate up from the center of the plant and stick up. So maybe one day I'll have one of those too. Okay, so why do these plants eat bugs? Well, the soil they naturally grow in is missing important nutrients that they need, specifically nitrogen and phosphorus. So they get their extra nutrients from insects. Neither of these two plants would survive the winter where I live, so I keep them inside. The thing is, you can't just treat them the way you treat your other house plants. So here's how you take care of carnivorous plants, at least these specific carnivorous plants. Before you can get around to the fun of feeding them insects, you have to make sure they're happy. They need to be in well-draining soil, so that means you need something with a healthy dose of peat moss, finely ground tree bark, sand, vermiculite, something like that that helps it drain. You can even do what I did with the succulents and put a layer of coarse sand or gravel at the bottom and then top it with soil mixed with your whatever medium you're using to help it drain. Watering is another really, really important factor for these guys because tap water is full of minerals and it will totally fry their roots. You cannot give these guys tap water. Even purified water is bad for them. So you really need to use either rainwater or distilled water. I use distilled water, and you can see during the growing season, I'm watering them from the bottom. They are sitting in distilled water. For the same reason that the tap water is not good for them, you can't ever add fertilizer to the soil. Do not ever, ever, ever fertilize the soil of these guys. It will kill them. So we know that these plants are adapted to poor soil, but they also are adapted to seasonal changes. So you have to kind of mimic those seasonal changes for them inside your house if you're keeping them as houseplants. So right now it's during the growing season, and I have these in a really sunny spot, but also under a grow light. Because during their growing season, which is about between March and October, they need a lot of sun, full sun, they need a lot of water. So it's best to keep their pot sitting in about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch of water. Remember, it has to be distilled water, and I just add a little more each day or every other day just to keep them watered from the bottom. And if the water looks dirty or anything, I just dump it and replace it with clean water. They also like warmer temperatures. They're pretty tolerant to temperature changes, but they do best above 60 degrees during their growing season. But in November, everything will change. Between November and February, they go through a dormancy period. You'll see the leaves, especially on, I haven't seen the pitcher plant yet during dormancy season, but on the Venus flytrap, the leaves, I thought it had at least one that was turning brown. Well, the leaves will turn brown, and then they turn black and they die off. And you just clip those off. But some of the leaves, they'll grow these little leaves without any traps on the ends of them. And those will last through the whole dormancy period. Those are just for photosynthesis, and they don't trap things during their dormancy period because it just takes too much energy. So yeah, during their dormancy period, they need colder temperatures because that's what triggers them to go dormant. So at some point in November or at the beginning of November or end of October, I will take them and move them to a colder spot. And they won't need to be sitting in water. They won't need as much water. I'll just keep the soil damp all the time. And the moss on top here really helps with that because it keeps the water from evaporating between waterings. I'll still give them distilled water, just not as much. But they need to be in a cold place. So if I had a garage or a shed, that's where I would put them during the winter. But I don't because I live in an apartment, so they will just sit next to a drafty window in my apartment during the winter. I'm sure you noticed that one of my Venus flytraps has much bigger leaf traps than the other. I'm not sure, just for perspective, you can see these leaf traps are about half the size of those. This is what happens when you don't give your plant a cold place to be dormant for the winter, for the dormant season. It looks a lot better now. It's got a lot more traps on it than it did, but for a while it was really struggling. I wasn't sure it was going to make it. So they really do need that dormancy period between November and February. Okay, now for the fun part. Let's feed these guys. Now, while it would be great to give them live bugs every week, and I'm sure they would love it, I do not have time to catch houseflies and wrangle them into the traps. So instead, I'm going to feed them freeze-dried insects that are sold at pet stores for pets like lizards and turtles. I have mealworms here, but also bloodworms or small crickets will all work. But the crickets would be too big for my plants right now. Maybe they might fit into the pitchers, but I went ahead and went with mealworms because they're smaller and easier to handle. So for the pitcher plant, if I went ahead and bought the crickets and they were too big, obviously if it was too big, it just wouldn't go into the pitcher and wouldn't hurt the plant. But for the Venus flytrap, if you put something in here that's too big, if it gets prey in there that's too big and it tries to close around it, it'll close, but it won't seal properly. And if it doesn't seal properly, then it's very vulnerable during digestion. So that allows bacteria to get in there, inside the trap, and then into your plant, and that can really harm your plant. So you should make sure not to put anything that's bigger than about 1/3 the size of the trap into the trap for a Venus flytrap. So here's what I have. I have mealworms, and we can use a full mealworm for this largest pitcher over here, but for the Venus flytraps, I have them cut into pieces already. You'll notice that I also have here, I have tweezers so that I can put them into the traps without using my fingers. I try to keep all my tools clean so as not to introduce any unnecessary bacteria into their traps. And then I also have this little toothpick here. I'm not going to use the floss for anything with them, but for the fly traps, there are these external hairs on the traps. You can see along the outside that kind of close up and keep things from getting out, larger insects from getting out. But inside the trap are little hairs too. And if the inside trap hairs, here you can see some in here. If the inner hairs are not triggered by the prey, then it won't seal. It'll open back up to let go, because it doesn't want to expend all that energy to digest something if it's not a living thing. So for example, that keeps it from wasting its digestive energy on a little twig that happened to fall into the trap. So we'll have to kind of tickle those hairs with the end of our toothpick to get it to seal properly. So for this big trap right here, I'm going to pick up this larger piece of mealworm. I just dropped it. Okay. All right. I'm having trouble doing the video and the feeding at the same time. So I'm going to put that in there. And then I will get my little toothpick, push it to the middle, and then tickle these hairs just a little bit. Try to get it to close. This one doesn't want to close. Here's an open one. Maybe we'll try this one. It's got a... All right, let me try to move this mealworm to a different trap. One thing to keep in mind is that, yes, these are really fun to trigger and watch them close, but each trap can only close about 2 to 4 times before it exhausts its energy for that leaf, and then the leaf will die off and your plant has to grow a new leaf. It takes a lot of energy to close these traps, and then another, a lot more energy to digest what's in them. So you don't want to make them close any more than they really have to. All right, this guy does not seem to want to close on my mealworms today. Let's see. All right, well, I'm gonna have to work on him later. I'm gonna take this extra small piece and put it in one of these traps. Let's try this one right here. Oops. Okay. So I need to kind of center it so that I know that the trap can close properly. There it goes. It's closing. Okay. So now it's closed, but it needs to think that there's a living thing in there so that it will seal. So I'm kind of reaching between its little fingers of the trap and moving the mealworm around so that it will go ahead and seal around it. All right, so hopefully that one will seal properly, and then it will digest that little mealworm inside there. Okay, so I want to take a full mealworm and put it inside one of these pitchers. The pitchers are not as exciting to watch eat, of course, because they don't snap shut. But this one, let's see, can you see inside there? This one has something still inside it, actually. Probably the leftovers of its last meal, which was a roly-poly bug. So I'm going to try this pitcher. Oh, this one's easier to see anyway. Okay, so with this one I shouldn't need the toothpick. I'll just take this mealworm and put it right down, drop it down into the bottom. And the pitchers are kind of cool because if you hold them up to the light, you can see kind of the digestive liquid in the bottom. It's kind of hard to see, but it sloshes around a little bit. It actually is full of liquid all the time. And now our mealworm is just down in the bottom there, and it will be digested. These guys like to be fed about once a week, not more than that, because they would expend too much energy. But I'm going to keep trying to feed this one, see if I can feed him, but I may have to just wait until all the other traps open back up. It can take them several days to open back up after you've closed them, unless they realize right away that there's nothing inside. So he also has some little baby leaves growing there, new little baby traps. So soon those will be big enough to feed too. So I hope you liked my video and you learned something new about carnivorous plants. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.